share. I know some of you had questions that you had posed earlier, so we'll be getting to those here momentarily. And first, I'm going to have our panelists go ahead and kick things off by introducing themselves, and then we'll jump into student questions. Students, I would say that as you're listening to responses and things, you may hear something in a response that kind of sparks a probing question or another question. Don't be afraid to jot that down and send that to me or bring that up in the conversation as we move on, because I know as you hear things, sometimes you think of things to ask. So to that end, why don't we start with Celia? We'll go ahead and have you introduce yourself.
Great, yeah. Thank you everyone for joining the call, and also thank you for the host for inviting us. I'll go ahead and give a brief introduction of myself. Currently, I'm working at Eli Lilly and Company as a scientist and biomedical engineer. I am part of a rotational program. So what that means is I get to be in 4 different departments for 2 years, but within each department, I'm there for 6 months. So the goal of the program is that at the end of the 2 years, basically I'll be able to find a permanent home based on the different skills and interests that I learn through each rotation. And then I'll back in a little bit into my academics and how I kind of got to the position that I'm in right now. So I've been a local of Indianapolis. I came here when I was 4 years old and then went to school here, and I started at Ivy Tech. So I studied general studies there in liberal arts and found out that I really did want to go into the STEM field, specifically in engineering. So in high school, I had worked as a certified nursing assistant, and I had that interest in healthcare, but I'm a big math nerd, so that's where the engineering kind of fell in for me. So I basically transferred into IUPUI, started studying there for biomedical engineering, and then I also became involved in research. So the first lab that I was in, it was a pathology lab through the IU School of Medicine, and then my second research experience was with Dr. Alves in the emergency medicine department as well. So I worked with him from my sophomore year to my senior year, and then that's also when I became involved with LSAMP. So I also mentored for the Math Tutoring Center, and then I was also doing research work as part of LSAMP. And so my junior year, the summer, that's when I interned at Eli Lilly, and Dr. Paul Ardayfio, he was my mentor and supervisor there, and then I was working in one of the labs with another mentor too there. So kind of my interest within research and then really building my network kind of led me to the position that I'm in now, and I'm still continuing to learn every day. So I'm always really excited really to get to learn about the science field and then continue to develop as a scientist. So I'm glad everyone is here today too.
Thank you, Celia. Paul?
Hi, Paul Ardayfio. Thanks for the invitation to speak with this group. So a little bit brief intro. So I'm currently at Eli Lilly as a clinical advisor, and so that what I do typically is design, implement clinical trials in the neuroscience space. I'm a neuroscientist by training, and so conduct clinical trials and programs related to neurodegenerative disease as well as psychiatric disorders, things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. So prior to that, I actually did a postdoc at Lilly, and prior to just going into a reverse chronological order, did my graduate work in neuroscience at Harvard, and then prior to that was spent some time overseas in England at another drug company, Merck, prior to starting grad school, and then did my undergrad in psychology and chemistry with a lot of pharmacology at Wayne State in Michigan. I'll leave it. I think one of the questions was involvement with LSAMP. So I'm on the advisory board, and then also a preceptor as well. And as Celia mentioned, I was fortunate to have her. She was awesome and was a rock star at Lilly, and everybody wanted to have her. And so she's certainly one of our great success stories and examples of, just awesome scientific talent.
Very good. Thank you very much, Paul. And Nathan, let's go over to you.
Sure. So my name is Nathan Alves. I've spoken to you synchronous and asynchronous on a few different occasions throughout this LSAMP summer session. I'll go in chronological order, I think, and see if that is any different. So I did my undergrad at University of Rochester in biomedical engineering. I did a master's there as well. And then I did my PhD at Notre Dame in chemical and biomolecular engineering. After my PhD, or actually during my PhD, I got married and ended up marrying someone who's in emergency medicine residency here at Indianapolis at IU School of Medicine. So I did a one-year postdoc at IU School of Medicine in the emergency medicine department, which was kind of odd. There are essentially no PhDs in the EM department. And then after that, I did 1 year exactly. My wife finished her fellowship or her residency, got accepted into a fellowship in DC. I did 2 years at the Naval Research Laboratory at the on a National Academy of Science fellowship doing chemical warfare remediation, which was really cool, really interesting stuff. And then me and my wife both got invited back to IU as faculty members, and now I've been here for 4 years. I'm still the one and only non-physician tenure track faculty member in the entire Department of Emergency Medicine out of about 150 clinical faculty members. And then my involvement with LSAMP, interestingly, so Celia was one of, if not the first student that I had in my new lab here at IU School of Medicine. And she, worked really well figuring out ways of applying to fellowships and different programs and getting travel grants and all sorts of stuff. And one of them was LSAMP. And so once you kind of get part of LSAMP, it kind of sucks you in. And and I've been doing LSAMP mentoring for the last 3.5 years-ish, pretty much almost from the beginning. So that's sort of where I've been and what I'm doing.
Very good. Well, thank you all for those introductions and giving students kind of an idea of your backgrounds. So I know that one of the first questions that came up was how. And by the way, to the panelists, as I said the other day, if one of you is going to answer a question the exact same way that somebody else would have, you can just say ditto, or if it's different, then certainly add your own 2 cents. So one of the first questions that come up is how did you decide on your particular field or area of focus? And I'll just why don't we start with Celia? How did you particularly decide on your field or focus?
Specifically with biomedical engineering, like I mentioned, I was a CNA and I really did like the interaction with the patients. But something that I did find just from my own style was that I became too attached to the patient. So for me, it was a little bit like difficult, and I was like, I love the field, but I don't think I could really get through it. So that's why I chose biomedical engineering, because there were parts of it that I felt that I could still continue to help patients in that way. And then once I got to university, I feel like my program did do a good job in terms of, I think when I first came in, I really didn't even know what biomedical engineering entitled. But through the program, I was able to learn like what my interests were in, and then through internships and research, I fell in love with research. I think that's what really like attracted me to the field. And I'm constantly still learning. So just like knowing that I have like an engineering degree, I think it's opened many doors to me. And I think, that's been one of the biggest reasons why I'm in that field. And I think, I'm continuing to learn and trying to see like what areas I want to continue to specialize in.
See, Nathan, maybe I can have you answer this one. Can you talk about what were some rookie mistakes that you made in the beginning of your career that you see other rookies making now?
Sure. So I'm in a really unique situation and have made perhaps more rookie mistakes than many, being the first and only of an entire category of employee in my tenure track position here at IU. But some of it is, and you hear these things all the time, everything needs to be in writing. Everything needs to be clear. Everything needs to be discussed. Talk to as many people as you possibly can before you accept anything that you're going to be doing or before you sign anything. And I'm learning this as I'm staying here longer and longer, that even if you have amazing relationships with people and people constantly come through and they have your back, they're not always guaranteed to stay. So, faculty, advisors, mentors, bosses, people leave, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. And it's really important to make sure that you know where you stand, make sure that you're protected, and make sure that you have things that you can fall back on in case you need to. So.
Okay, very good. And Paul, how about for you on that? Any particular rookie mistakes that you made that they can learn from?
Too many to count.
Top two. What are your top two?
Top two. Good question. I would say not understanding. Well, this one I think maybe permeates a lot of things, but not understanding the currency of the organization or institution that you're in. And so this can apply anywhere. So you need to know, and I talk to a lot of early career scientists and students that come to Lily's but I think it applies anywhere, is understand what your organization. I mean, of course, you got to be true to yourself and deliver things that you think are important, but you need to understand, what does your organization value, right? Is it and deliver on that, and don't expect that. And so what I see a lot of, and what I was doing, is you're working really, really hard, but not delivering on things that are of importance to whatever entity or organization that you're in. So if you're a student, what's the currency? What's of value for the graduate school for you to graduate, right? It means number of publications, what is grades, whatever it is, right? Quality of publications, right? And so I would do things, working really hard on particular projects or doing things, and and then I would sit down and say, yeah, this is great, but we don't really care about this, right? And so doing the hard work to understand, and the broadest way I could say is understand the currency of the organization or institution that you're involved in, what they value, and deliver on those things. And otherwise you can be working really, really hard on things and getting really frustrated because you're not delivering what the organization values. And if that organization is responsible for your advancement and if then you need to understand that. Whether or not you choose to deliver on that is your own, but you need to understand why or why not, because that will let you understand why you think you're doing really well, but there's a disconnect between what you think you're doing as far as performance and what the organization thinks that you're doing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really great advice, and I would add to that too that's a good question for the students. We had the interviewing workshop last week. That's a good question to ask in an interview: is what is important to your organization? What do you see as the priorities? And then whatever that answer is, save it to your memory, because if you're hired, then you kind of know what their priorities are. So that's great advice. Paul mentioned something about graduate school, and that's actually another question that came up here, and I'll just fire this out to any of you. What advice do you have regarding applying to postgraduate programs?
Or maybe I'll start with that one. The thing that I think is most important is understanding, and this goes to understanding the currency, is understanding the process. The process is not the same everywhere. It's not the same at different departments at the same school. It's not the same at different schools. It's really important for you to do a lot of homework figuring out exactly what the process is, because sometimes it's applying to an umbrella program, you get admitted as a cohort, and sometimes it's applying specifically to a school, but making contact to PIs. And in some programs, like at Purdue, if the PI doesn't accept you, then you're not accepted into the program. So a lot of programs do either a direct admit or a cohort admit is what I call it. And it's really important to understand that difference.
Can I, oh, go ahead, Paul, and then I'm just gonna hop in behind Paul.
Yeah, I'll say ditto. I just add to that, you know, there's a lot of things that you can do early on. I remember, and this goes back to the point about, you know, how do you figure out what you want to do, as well as, you know, where you want to do it as far as grad school. But, you know, I think internships are critical, right? And so, you know, as an undergrad, I did, you know, so I had my main institution where I did research, but every summer I went away to someplace else. The first summer I went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. The second summer I went to University of Minnesota. Then the third summer I went to Merck. I did one in industry. And so what was critical, you know, it wasn't that, I thought that all my experiences were wonderful, even though some I would rather not do again. And that's because I also valued understanding what I didn't like as much as what I did like. So there were some things that I did, like to Celia's point about, you know, her experience, that it taught you that, okay, well, you know, I don't want to be so intimately involved in patients, so I moved in this other direction. So I see that as you know, sometimes students not valuing when they have an experience and weren't overly thrilled about it. Well, you know, be positive about it. Say, you know, this was great because now I learned what I don't like. And then that ties into grad school as well. That's a great way to to test drive grad schools. You know, see if you can find some kind of internship or experience there. Make sure that there are multiple people that you could work with, right? Because you know, I see so many students where, you know, they go to that one rock star's lab, you know, that they went to this institution for one rock star and it's not a good fit. Well, you know, and then there are not other faculty there that they feel that they could work with. So when you choose a grad school, you know, make sure you've done your homework. Make sure there are multiple people that you believe that you could work with there, and not just one person that's, you know, the leader in the field, because that's not always necessarily the best environment for your training.
Yeah. And fit is really important, especially, I mean, you if you know what you want to do and where you want to work, you might find the perfect lab that does that kind of research. But if it doesn't fit, like if you don't fit at the culture of how people do research there, if you don't get along with the PI and stuff, it's going to be a long process. So make sure you talk and you understand the culture of what's going on in the lab, what the expectations are, and what kind of interactions you're going to have.
That's really, really great insight. And I think that really goes with any job that you have. It's like you go and they're looking to see if you're a good fit, but you need to make sure that they're a good fit for you as well. That's equally as important. Michelle, did you want to say something? Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just for logistics, I wanted to hop in and just kind of give some keys, because absolutely what they said was so critical when you're searching for a postdoc position or even a graduate school. My first thing is, I always say to the student, have you picked the school? And they say yes. And I say, have you picked the department? Can you tell me the chair of the department? Can you tell me the degree you want to seek? Because those are two things you're going to need to know right out of the gate. And then once you have those two and you look at that department, have you picked a faculty mentor you want to work with? And that's where you start doing the research online. You look at bios and things like that. But once you find that faculty mentor that has some research that speaks to you or you think you want to work with, I always say, have you emailed them or have you met them? Because you're talking about a huge chunk of your life for a PhD. And if you don't feel comfortable emailing or meeting, or you haven't got a response to an email or a meeting request, that's going to really indicate a lot of how this relationship is going to work. So if you're someone who needs a lot of, wants to be a partner, and this person maybe runs a stable of 10 PhDs and they expect them to work autonomously, it may not be the best fit. So I always say, have you emailed or met them? And ask some of those just really general questions about your work style and their work style, because it's very important. And then if you did meet them and you talk to them, why are they now one of your top choices? Because we're talking about a huge decision. So there should be a reason why this person stood out to you. And after that follow-up meeting, what you still really was like, that really supported what I thought about that lab or about that person's research. And then take that back into your statement of purpose, which everyone has to write for a graduate school. The statement of purpose, at some point you should say, does my mission match the mission of this school? Or does my mission match the mission of this research? Or does my mission match the mission of this person's work ethic? And there should be something that ties you personally back to that huge mission, because the person reading those statements of purpose work with these people. These are their colleagues, and you're coming from a lot of applicants. And so you want something that's going to stand out, that shows you've done your research and you're a good fit. You want to do the work for them. You don't want them to have to figure out why you would fit in this lab. You want to be like, I would fit in this lab because I saw what you did, and here's what I can do, and this looks really good together. And so for me, I always say, make sure that your mission matches their mission and that you've read their mission. This is the classic mistake that I have seen. Please don't send a recommendation letter with someone else's school name on it. Hi, I want to go to Notre Dame, but my letter says, hello, Harvard, I can't wait to get on your campus. So please always, just a little logistical clerical note, always put the name of the school. When you send a file to a school, it should have your last name and it should have the name of the school. So it should be like Quirk_ND. So you don't accidentally upload the wrong file, because that has happened a few times. So please make sure that you do that. And that's just a really easy way for you to keep it, because as I always recommend, you should always apply to more than one school. So for me, those were just some logistic things as you go into that graduate school, just some things to think about.
I had given this advice in a previous session, but make it difficult for them to say no. And that, I mean, it really goes a long way.
That's great advice, Nathan. This is really helpful, and I like Michelle, what you were saying about how to organize your files, your name and the name of the school is excellent. And I would add to that, for employment too, not just for graduate schools and postdoc, but employment too, because you're going to be sending out lots of resumes and cover letters. And
yeah, I've been a chair of an admissions committee before for a program. It's happened.
Yeah.
Would be the first one to do it. So
right.
just trust me. We always kind of say, oops, I think they forgot to send the right letter. We have to write them back and say, I think you forgot to send the right letter, but tell John at Rutgers I said hi.
Yeah, right. Good advice. Okay. So
Can I add,
go ahead, Paul.
Can I just add one thing? As I think there were great comments by Michelle and Nathan. One thing that came to mind as Michelle's talking was another very common mistake I see is a topic versus the training, right? And thinking about, I've talked with a lot of students that think that for graduate school, it has to be the topic that, and they choose a lab based almost exclusively on the topic. Oh, this is something that I'm really, a question I've always wanted to answer, and don't think about the microenvironment. And that will actually have a bigger impact on whether you finish, how well you finish, the relationship with the PI, the microenvironment of that lab will have a much bigger impact. So again, I don't want to go to the extreme of saying that that topic doesn't matter. It has to be something that's interesting enough to keep you grinding for 5 years, right? So you shouldn't go and do something that you just really don't care about. But I've seen some students go to the other extreme where that's the only lens that they use. And I think that's a mistake, because you could go to a lab that has could be an incredible fit, great culture for you and the type of training that you need. But it may be number 3 on your top 3 sort of scientific questions that you wanted to ask. Whereas, question number 1, the thing that you're super passionate about is in a lab that's a terrible fit, right? And just keeping in mind that the purpose of graduate school is to make you a good scientist. You can then go on and address your strong scientific foundation to the problems that are of interest to you. That you don't have to do that as a graduate student.
Sure. This is a great discussion. I wanna reach back out to Celia on this one. Celia, what would you say? What do you think are your top 3 qualities of a great STEM professional? What are these students? What do they need to have in order to succeed in the STEM field, in your opinion?
I think the first one that kind of comes into mind would be just to have genuine curiosity.
Okay.
So just be eager to always want to learn and find out why things work. I think it's okay to challenge the information that you're given in terms of wanting to understand why is this process what it is. Because I think at least I've learned to an industry, a lot of our processes they are in place and it's regulated, but they're also looking for innovation. And the way that you kind of find that is through challenging some of the ideas and trying to find out how to improve. So kind of being brave and, you know, always, of course, doing your research. If you're proposing something new, you want to be prepared, but don't be afraid to, just be able to challenge and find out why certain things are in place. The second one, I would say, like building relationships. I think that's like in any field that you go into, I think that's very important, because it is important, again, the type of research that you're doing in your work, but you also want to know that there are people that can help you, and then there's also people that you can help, because you might, you know, be doing great work, but if you aren't connecting with the people that are maybe moving different like projects or research, it could be hard to, I guess, advance in that career field. And then kind of with that too, like just also like having that eagerness to help those around you as well. So even if you are going into your career and maybe you're past that point, go ahead and look back into, you know, what are the students or what are like early professionals and what type of goals do they want to reach? Because I think, at least for me, like that's something that I really enjoy too. And I feel like I also learn from the people that I'm able to mentor. And I think my mentors could probably say that too, that they've, you know, they learned a lot from their mentees too. So I think that's very important. And just having that open mindset to learn from your mentees and then also yourself.
Okay. And I think those are, so you got curiosity, building relationships, and then you said an eagerness to help. Those are, I think that's great advice to these students. And I'm going to shift over to Nathan here and ask you, you mentioned your wife was at the same university. You guys had appointments at the same university. Is that correct?
So we were at undergrad together, and she was part of the REMS program. So she stayed at University of Rochester into medical school. Then we separated in space, and I went to Notre Dame. She then followed to the Midwest and got to Indianapolis. And then after all that, we ended up back in Indianapolis, both as faculty members.
Okay, and so I guess that begs another question, which is how do you maintain some sort of work-life balance? How do you maintain those things, right? Because you be challenging.
Well, I want to make one point about the previous question, and then I'll answer this one. Just a really short one. So a long time ago, a really smart guy told me once that in order to succeed in a scientific career, you need to have either good hands, you need to write well, or you have to have good ideas. Any two of the three, and you'll be successful, is what he said. And it was just really interesting. You don't need to be great at everything, but you do need to be good at certain things. And I thought that was interesting.
That's great.
Work-life balance. I mean, this is something that I struggle with and everyone struggles with a lot. I'm what's called an integrator. If you don't know what that means, you can take all these surveys that tell you what kind of personality that you are. Integrating means that my work and my life are like this. So at any given time, like if I'm at home and I get a work email, I will respond. Or if I'm at work and I get a home phone call, I will answer. Whereas there are other people that don't do that. Other people have very separate things. When they're done at work, they're not responding to any work information. And in that way, I feel like it makes my life a little easier, even though it's more complicated in some ways. But the work-life balance means that I can then, if I need to be home for a certain time during a work day, I can. If I need to do work at night, then I can. And I don't have these really strict boundaries that restrict progress on either front. And then there's this other idea called the two-body problem. So when you have two people that are trying to stay together, like a married couple, that are both competitive in their careers, that are highly educated and have restricted access to stuff depending on where they are or what city, getting them both to move for competitive careers and competitive jobs and be located at the same location at the same time is very difficult. And so we were really fortunate with how IU happened when we both got faculty position offers, and one of it was because my wife was actually the only adult EM residency trained pediatric emergency medicine fellow trained physician in the entire network. and I was the only PhD that had done a postdoc in the department, so I was a known quantity, and so they were willing to take a risk essentially and hire me as a tenure track faculty member. So kind of as a side note, but related, doing good work regardless of what you're doing is really important, because you never know when you're going to end up coming back to something that you thought was just done. Because we're not from the Midwest. We didn't think we were going to be back here at all.
Great, and that's great advice as well. And I think that it kind of goes along with make yourself stick out, be known for something so that you have value and the organization sees that value. And could you just comment real quick, because I've heard this and this might be good for the students to know. Is it possible to get appointments, not just at universities, but other places too, contingent upon them also accepting a spouse?
Yeah, there's this idea called a spouse hire.
Yes.
And me and my wife joke about who was the spouse hire in our relationship. But yes, in certain competitive careers, if an industry wants you enough, or a company is large enough to support your spouse as well, then it does happen. In academia, especially like a place like this, it's fairly common because, IU School of Medicine and IUPUI have every job opportunity you kind of could possibly have almost under this roof. I don't know how frequently it is, but it is definitely something that we interacted with on a number of different opportunities. So I know it does exist relatively commonly.
Paul, got a question for you, Paul. So I know that sometimes as college students, students take classes and maybe in or out of the STEM field and just wonder, well, how am I going to apply this knowledge? I don't see where this is relevant. So could you maybe pick, maybe one non-STEM class and then maybe one or two STEM related classes to where you've been able to apply something that you've learned in those to your work?
Okay. Ooh, that's a tough one. Let's see. I would say like I don't know that it's, okay, maybe I can twist the question a little bit. So I would say like my humanities courses, like my literature courses, where I had to do a ton of writing. And actually, this goes to one of those big misconceptions, right? So if you just tell someone, you're a scientist, they have, a certain image, right? And it's pretty distinct from actually what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is kind of sit in front of a computer like this. And the second biggest thing I do is writing, right? And so, being a good writer, I think Nathan mentioned it previously, one of the top three things, right, is a critical skill to have. So I would say my literature courses, my humanities courses, not only because they taught me how to write, but, I think, it's important not to be too cliche, but, just as far as, enjoying life and understanding different things about, science is very much, a global, phenomena. And so I think, you have to travel a lot. You have to, interact with so many different cultures. And so I think that, the humanities courses and literature courses were critical for that. I learned a lot. So I do a lot of, obviously, in the pharmaceutical industry, so pharmacology. And so, my pharmacology courses were critical. But, I will say that, overall, I think the biggest thing undergrad, taught me, irrespective of the specific classes, just how to learn, learning agility, how to learn different things quickly and to question. And so, although, it's hard to come up with specific things that it's been a while, I know that I can find the answers and learning how to learn, I would say, was a big takeaway.
You mentioned compute, that you don't just sit at your computer. You were mentioning that, and it prompted another question. Is And Celia, we'll let you tackle this one. So because now things are so virtual, especially with COVID-19 and a lot of things going online. So what tips would you offer for these students on how to work in a virtual setting?
So I think while I answer this question, I'll probably also share some of my experiences that you also asked Paul.
Okay, sure.
But during undergrad, I took business courses that were not required for my program just because I had that interest. So I took business administration and accounting. And now being in my field, that's really helped me because, especially in a company so big as Lilly, just being able to have conversations with people outside of your field and then also understanding their work, but then also understanding how their work drives or like affects like my work in the lab. So I think that's been huge. And then now being in a virtual setting, we've had to transition a lot of like our meetings again to virtual. So having also again been in those business courses, I feel like I've been able to better interact and like just being able to set one-on-ones with different coworkers. And then also I helped out with the internship program, and one of our challenges was for a period of time we couldn't bring in the interns, so I created a virtual tour, so I was able to go into the lab and then just record and edit. And some of those things were things that I learned from outside my class. So just like having that flexibility, but then also speaking up and saying like, I'm interested in working on these projects, or I'd like to help out, and volunteering yourself. Because that was a challenge for myself. I don't always speak up, and I feel like I'm learning to like be better at that, especially at Lilly, and then also like doing my undergrad research. I found out that it's better to ask sooner and just like speak up and say like what you're able to bring to the table. Don't necessarily wait for people to ask you to do something. So that's definitely very like helpful right now in the virtual environment when you're not, you know, in the office with other people or in class, seeing them day by day.
Okay, that's great.
I want to jump on
Nathan.
this too.
Yeah.
So we already talked about, you know, you wanting to stick out and you want to make yourself known and you want to be making sure that you're memorable. And so we'll see how many people are paying attention right now, but there was two. Now there's only one person that's in this entire chat that's not on the panel that has their video open. So there's a screen full of names here, and hopefully, you know, COVID-19 will be gone at some point, and I might be interacting with some of you guys, and I can tell you names are going to be rough for me, but I remember faces. I highly recommend camera. Get whatever FaceTime you can, however it works. I don't care if you're literally in a closet with a white background. I think it's really important to keep these interactions as human as possible and as normal as possible, so that when things get back to normal, you know, people will recognize what's been happening.
Yeah, and the communication professor totally agrees with that, by the way.
Good.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so we've got about 20 minutes left. I want to make sure that we're getting all of the students' questions answered. I have all of the ones that were posted in the chat earlier. I think we've tackled all of those. Let me see. Oh, there was one other one. Let me see. Hold on. Where did that go? Oh, yeah. This one I want to ask, I want to come back to Celia on this one. As the most recent graduate, just last May, I believe. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Can you talk about what have been some of the biggest challenges for you moving from school to work, and how have you managed those challenges?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
That's why I asked.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, definitely my first like few months, I definitely felt the transition. But I felt like in college, I was, I guess, a pretty non-traditional student. And coming into industry, like I feel supported at work, and I think, you know, we have the shared experience of the different like science that we're working on and the research that we're trying to drive. But even then, you'll find that your experience can still be very different. So kind of balancing that like work and life. So like for myself, I'm still an early career professional and I live at home, but since graduating from college, I provide for my family. So sometimes that's kind of difficult in terms of like working with coworkers, because sometimes they could be the assumption that, oh, because they're early career professionals, they probably have more liberty in terms of like their time and work balance. But I think that I've also been able to find like good allies and like been able to like share my experience that, you know, I'm still like a non-traditional sort of like early career. And then just really like being free to like be passionate in my work and really being able to spend time on my research, and then building that routine. So like that's been like a nice transition where I feel like I have like more of that liberty that I kind of get to drive my research. But I do know that like a lot of it was because of the preparation that I had, you know, in my undergrad, and then just kind of like staying disciplined. So I think that was my biggest transition, like really realizing that, you know, I'm still an early professional and I'm like learning, but I feel like still my experiences are a little bit non-traditional than a early career.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's for students, sometimes it's hard to realize, but there's going to be that day where you wake up and you just by natural instinct start driving toward campus, and then you're like, oh wait, I'm done. I got to be driving to work, right?
Yeah.
So I remember when that happened for me, it was a little bit weird, right? That I had to be somewhere at 8 a.m. and it wasn't like I could show up 10 minutes late, just kind of casually stroll in, because there was more accountability in the workforce. And so I think that was a big sort of wake up call. Plus you go into somewhere and you're not learning so much as you're which I think was another big sort of not shocker, but transition kind of thing. So, okay, let's go to the class here. Let's see, you've heard a lot from these panelists who have shared some really great insight, and hopefully these are folks that you'll maintain some connections with. What are some of the questions that that you've been thinking about the last 45 minutes or so that you would like to ask the panelists?
Maybe while people are thinking, I'll respond to that last question.
Sure.
So from the perspective of graduate school, as having graduated graduate school not that long ago and having graduate students now, one of the first things I do is when my students enter the lab, I sit them down and we talk about how this is the beginning of their career. And so having that shift of, you know, this isn't about making the grade. This isn't about just being here to get the stuff done. This is investing in your life. Makes that transition from graduate school to regular work a lot less different in some regards.
Almost like a bridge.
Yeah. And it's just a perspective shift, but I think it really helps people understand that, you know, they're not doing it because I'm telling them to do it. They're doing it because they want to succeed in their life and lay a framework for whatever the next step is.
Okay. There's a question here. So what was the moment that made everything click for you regarding what path you wanted for yourself? I'll just open that up to any of you. What was the moment that made everything click for you regarding what path you wanted for yourself?
Maybe I mean, you need to be open to whatever path is in front of you in some regards. I said earlier, you know, my goal was not necessarily to be back in the Midwest. We don't have any family here and like that, but an opportunity arose. I think when things align and if you really consider opportunities, it'll be pretty obvious.
I'll tag on to that real quick, and then if Celia and Paul, if you have anything to add, that's fine as well. I would say, you know, these folks mentioned earlier the importance of internships, and I think that is so critical because that really does give you an opportunity to see what you like and don't like. And if you don't like it, guess what? You're out 6 months, not an entire career. And so better to realize that through an internship or some volunteer experiences even, to sort of dip your toe into the water into some different areas without any level of commitment. And so that can really help shape your interests as well. Paul or Celia, anything that was that sort of that defining moment where you knew like, oh, this is the area?
I think for me, I mean, would be once I really started getting involved in undergrad research, because I started to see, you know, how the ideas in my classroom, like how I could use them in the work that I was doing. And then I also attended conferences and I was able to present my work. So I think that in itself, like I could see, like it was a very rewarding experience for myself to be able to talk to other scientists and people that were like interested in the field. So like that, I think that's what got me really excited to see like, oh, there's, you know, people that are interested in this. And, you know, I can learn from them, they can learn from me. And just, yeah, throughout the whole process, whether it was like working in the lab or like writing, I felt like I had also that flexibility to learn different skills. So that was a major reason or like moment when I realized that this is the path that I wanted to continue.
And that's one of the things you mentioned. You said, as far as top 3 skills, curiosity, building relationships, and your eagerness to help. So I see that kind of coming through there. Paul, how about you? Is there a defining moment?
Yeah, I don't think that there's a defining, there was a defining moment. I think there were defining moments for specific decisions, but I think it's fun. I think that click happens throughout your life, right? Even now, you continue to say, you know, am I doing, you know, what I'm best suited to do? You know, I have that conversation with myself all the time, right? And that's been throughout, you know, at every stage. So yes, there were defining things like my decision to go to grad school in neuroscience, right? That was because, you know, after, you know, to the point about internships, right? That was after, you know, working in a psychiatric hospital. That was after, you know, 5 years of doing undergrad research in the pharmacology department, you know, 3 different internships, you know, working in an addiction center, right? So all these things. So after all those experiences, you know, it's like, yes, I want to devote my life to, you know, studying the brain and diseases of the brain, right? But the details under that, how and when those are conversations you continually have throughout your life. So I would say I continue to have those clicks and continue to challenge myself on, you know, what is it that I'm best suited to do and best able to apply my skills to and make the biggest impact, right? And that changes. You know, initially, you know, I was thinking it was academia or other areas, right? And that continues to evolve.
I think people assume that like something clicks and then it happens and then you're in your career and you're like, oh, I'm here, I've made it, I shall remain here for the rest of my life, and I'm done. And
It doesn't work like that.
and I can tell you that just doesn't happen, right? I mean, I think you'd be doing a disservice to yourself not paying attention to opportunities along the way, or, you know, reaffirming your love for whatever you're doing. And so like Paul had said, you know, over time, there's many little clicks and things change, perspective changes, life changes, research changes. So you got to be, you know, keep your eyes open, I guess.
Yeah, and you know, you never know where you're going to wind up or what might spark the interest. Like you could be volunteering in a hospital doing something that has nothing to do with your future career. All of a sudden, you're in the cafeteria one day, strike up a conversation with somebody in the STEM field, and that kind of just leads down a whole other path. So you've got to be really open and willing to accept these different kinds of opportunities. And I would add to the 3 of their answers too is don't ask people questions about the type of work that they do and to ask them for additional connections. You're going to learn a lot through an informational interview with people. So, you know, just kind of picking people's brains a little bit. So what other questions do you have for our panelists today? These are really great questions, feeling some great discussion. What else is on your mind?
I want to add to Mike's question or suggestion, actually, when he said make sure you ask questions. I say ask twice. How many times do you go up to somebody and you say, what do you do? And they say, oh, I do cancer research on mice. And it's like, no. What do you do? Like on a day-to-day basis, what are you actually doing? And then you find out, you know, they're the animal surgeon, or they're the synthetic chemist that produces the drugs that go in the animal, or they're the PI that sits and writes and stuff. So it's important to understand what that job title or what that position actually does.
I like that. Ask twice. Yeah, because sometimes they give you like a real surface level answer.
And I did want to see that I did post a link to Celia's resume there. So if you have a chance to look at that and some ideas or questions spark with you, please make sure that you take a moment to follow our panelists on LinkedIn, and remember to send that nice professional note to say where you found the connection. And then if an idea or a question comes into your mind after you look at some of these things and marinate on them, it's always a good idea to reach back out. This is a very approachable panel, which is why I picked them here at the end, because I want you to feel like you have a network where you can ask some of those questions that may not occur to you right here on the spot. So definitely let me know if you have any trouble seeing Celia's CV, but also remember to use the LinkedIn, and definitely feel free to ask questions if right now they're not in your mind, but you think of it as soon as we end today.
Yeah, and to jump off of Michelle too, don't be afraid to reach out, not just these panelists, but your mentors and things like that. Every 6 months, I say every semester, just give them an update. Hey, Celia, we met in the panel on blah, 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 blah. It's been 6 months. I just graduated. I'm looking for a job in such and such field. And then once you're in the job, hey, I've been in this field for a year. We met during the panel for the LSAMP group, because then it's keeping that connection with Celia or Paul or Nathan or whoever it is, rather than reaching out after 5 years and saying, hey, I know we haven't talked in a while, okay? At least at this point, they kind of know what you're doing. Here comes a good question. Does a low or average GPA prevent someone from getting into graduate school? And I'll do the follow-up on that. Is there something that they can do if that's the case? Is there something people can do if they don't have the GPA to get into graduate school, maybe for a year or two, to make themselves more desirable for a graduate?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Oh no, you start, Paul. I'll jump on it.
Paul?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh,
Go,
okay.
Paul.
I'll do it. It's fine. So coming from the graduate program and me accepting graduate students, the burden falls on the student to demonstrate why the GPA is not a reflection of what they actually are capable of doing. And that requires you to essentially reach out, make sure you make a personal connection, try to figure out a way to have a conversation, because unfortunately a GPA is a really, really easy way of rank ordering applications, and it can rule you out right from the beginning if you don't go that extra step.
Good. Okay. Paul, any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. I mean, there are a lot of post-bac programs out there. There's ways you can, take graduate level courses, either to Nathan's point. I mean, it's part of a story. And if that story is that this student, if your transcripts tell a story that you probably can't handle the rigors of graduate coursework, then, of course, the reasonable answer is going to be no, right? But there are a lot of nuances there, right? Is it an upward trend versus a lower trend? Two students could have the same GPA, right? But one is showing an upward trend, meaning that they had a few missteps, early on, but they learned from them and recovered, right? You could have another student that had the same GPA, lower or average GPA, but it's a downward trend. I'd be more concerned about, and so, sitting on various advisory committees and graduate or scholarship committees, those are things that I look for. Is it, what were the reasons? And to Nathan's point, do you have, what can you do to change that story? If I see a lower GPA, but then this student has taken, several graduate level courses or done post-bac work or has, great reasons for these, then, it's no longer a concern. But if it's just out there, if it's just a low GPA and there's no trade-off, they're not a rock star, published, 5 papers as an undergrad, and there's nothing that lets me know that there's something unique about this, then my only interpretation is going to be, I don't think they could handle the rigors of graduate work unless I have other data to that. It's your job as a student to provide those other data points.
And I think hop in here also really quickly, just as a chair of an admissions committee. One thing that we look at is you have that statement of purpose for a reason. That is a time to tell your story. And what I really like to see is perhaps a student who was challenged in one area, or if that student worked full time and they had a lot of things going on and they kind of turned the ship around, or if they maybe were in a degree and they weren't passionate about it, and then their junior year, they took an organic chemistry class and it was really difficult for them, and they knew they had to start using the tutoring center. There's nothing better that I like to see in an admissions committee is somebody to tell me, I recognize my gap, and here's what I did to fix it. And I only had my senior year, but if you look at my senior year, I did everything I could to get that GPA up. That tells me your light bulb went on. But I don't know when your light bulb went on, and I don't know what it was, and I don't know what made you make that transition. So if you don't tell me that in your statement of purpose, I have to guess. And so it's okay if you got a late start, if you were in the wrong degree, if a lot of things happen that maybe just didn't get you where you need to be by your senior year, and you know you're pushing up against getting that GPA up because it's really hard to move by your senior year. Another great thing is the grad non-degree courses. If you finish up your senior year and you're at a 2.99 and you finished up and you're like, oh, I'm so close, go back and take a grad non-degree class in the summer and really just use that time to say, now that I know what I want, I'm doing everything I can to get there. And if I have to pay for one class myself, that's what I did.
And take a relevant course. Don't take like Movies 101 and get an A to bring you up to like 3.
Right. So Rose has done some research. This is great. I noticed Cecilia has a lot of minority scholarships. Any advice on how or where to find the right ones? Celia.
So when I started, I looked into my community. Throughout Indiana, I literally looked at, what were the different minority organizations. And then I also did become involved with those organizations. So that kind of gave me a chance to learn more about their organization, and then they also had the opportunity to learn about myself. And just in general, like with scholarships, I feel like when you're researching the type of scholarship, you really do have to understand the organization and what they do. And because for a lot of the scholarships that I read, as I was reading, there was times that I was like, I just felt like everything related kind of when I applied, and it was kind of like, oh, this scholarship, I need to apply for it. So I became very excited about it. So just in general, when you're looking for these scholarships, look at each of the organization's mission and just try to get to know your community and see how you can give back to them. And then another way that you can find scholarships in general or internships would be through conferences. That's something that I learned, from attending them, and then just going to their website. They have a lot of resources there. And then now also being in industry, our company always looks to attend conferences to recruit or offer different opportunities to students. And graduate schools will also do that. So they'll go out and look for those students. So you do have to kind of really get to know your community. And then if you're looking at a national level, then also find out, where are they being involved and what are the causes in their mission and what's important to them, and see if that's something that you relate to.
Just try to align yourself with those, whatever those missions are, try to align yourself with those too.
And just a really small point. So Celia was hugely successful at this, as you saw on her CV. Sometimes you won't always perfectly align, but you're close. And I would say apply anyways. Let them say no. Sometimes these applications go with very few potential opportunities to give money, and they're looking to give money to people. So make sure that you are doing it and you are letting them say no rather than you not even giving yourself a chance at it.
Cast a wide net when it comes to applying for scholarships and things. Okay, we are at time. I want to, so I don't know, Michelle or Anika, are y'all staying on, or where do we go from here?
We are going to go ahead and wrap up. And if everybody, if you have a chance, go ahead and do me a favor and turn on your camera and wave and say thank you for our panelists today. And we'll go ahead and wrap up for today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all for joining us today. We definitely do appreciate it.
And we will go ahead and post this video, and I'll make sure that everyone has the connections for any follow-up questions. And if possible, we'll try to bring this panel back again in the fall or during our conference as well, too. So if you have those questions and we don't get to them, and there's still time in the fall for us to have a second STEM career panel. So if you are not with IUPUI, if you want to go ahead and hop off for today, IUPUI is going to go ahead and stay in the room and finish up their final cohort meeting for the summer. So thank you, everyone. Panelists, thank you as always. We love to have you with us. And I love that you have the LSAMP passion, that you come back and keep giving back each year, because it does make a huge difference for our students. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate having you today.
Thank
Paul,
you.
Celia,
you.
Nathan, thank you all so much. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Take
You
care,
as
Mike.
well.